Okay, hi there everyone. So as Michelle said, I'm Hannah Baker from Groundwork London. So we're here to talk to you about the Spirit project, and I'll give you a bit of a background to that initially. And I'm then going to talk about some of the activities and results of the project. My focus is mainly on the European side of the project, and Rebecca's more on the London delivery. So we'll kind of split our presentation in that way too. We'll have some lessons learned to share with you as well, and some case studies, both from the London perspective and also from some of our other European partners that we've been working with. And we'll also be sharing some of the sort of resources that we've developed through the project as well. But just to start with, in case any of you aren't familiar with Groundwork London, so Groundwork London is an environmental regeneration charity established in 1982. We have lots of projects working across London in many different ways, but generally under these three themes that you can see here. But in fact, most of our projects, or many of our projects, cover multiple themes, as this one really does. So this is just to give you a bit of an idea of some of the work that we've been doing. The focus being on creating better places, improving people's prospects, and promoting greener living and working. So, what's the Spirit project? So it's co-funded by Intelligent Energy Europe, which is a European Union programme, and it's all about sort of thinking about sustainability and saving energy in particular. Intelligent Energy Europe actually no longer it sort of exists as a new funding stream, but many projects like ours are sort of still going and coming to an end. So Spirit started in March 2014, and it finishes actually at the end of this month, at the end of November. It's all about working with faith communities. So we've been engaging faith organisations to think about behaviour change and energy saving activities in the home. And with a result of leading to reducing CO2 emissions and supporting lasting behaviour change. Through the programme, we've been working with volunteer energy champions. So these are members of faith communities that are interested in helping both themselves and their sort of friends, family, neighbours, local community save energy. And through the programme, we give them free training in this and then help support them to go on and deliver energy advice to people that they know. And through this, we've been able to engage different sort of parts of the community, different people that are often harder to reach, and also often people that are likely to benefit greatly from this kind of advice. So in the project, we have 8 different partner organisations across European countries, as you can see here. 7 of the partners, including ourselves, have been delivering the project, so going to engage these faith communities, whereas Austria initially did, and we'll tell you a bit more about that later, but their focus has now been on the sort of evaluation and monitoring of the impact of the project, which I'll come to. As you'll see, there's quite a range of organisations. A number of these you won't have heard of, they're quite small, but we've got a mix of some non-governmental organisations, sort of energy agencies, and Groundwork obviously is a charity. There are other charities there too. So it's quite a mix of organisations working together. And many of them have done quite a lot of work on behaviour change and energy saving activities before. So some of the main project outcomes that we've been working towards. So we've been trying to establish and test this methodology for engaging faith communities and delivering these energy-saving behaviour change campaigns. It's quite new. When the project started out in 2014, this wasn't something that had been done very much. There were obviously lots of examples of initiatives focused on behaviour change. There were examples of initiatives focused on engaging volunteers in behaviour change around energy saving. But working with faith communities was something that was quite different when the project started out, so it provided quite a good opportunity to sort of test this methodology and find out what works and what doesn't work, of course, as well. So as you see some of the numbers here that we've been working towards, 295 members of faith-based networks to be trained as energy champions, 700 demonstration assessments, and by that we mean professional energy advisors. For example, in Groundwork London we have advisors called green doctors that go into homes and deliver advice. And this was part of the training in this project. So our energy champions could go into homes with green doctors and sort of learn by doing, learn in the homes how to deliver that advice. 6,200 energy champion advice sessions. So that's where we've said to the energy champions, you know, go and talk to your peers, go and share that advice with them directly, whether that be with or without the support of green doctors or other professional advisors. And as you see, we've got some pretty ambitious targets there for energy savings and carbon emissions reductions, which I'll come to later in terms of how we're doing so far. Just going back a step though, just to explain sort of why we've been working with faith communities, which could seem like a bit of an interesting angle to take. But really the reason being that we saw there to be lots of very strong existing networks within faith communities that could potentially be used to help deliver advice and sort of get the message about energy saving to a much wider group of people than perhaps normal sort of behaviour change campaigns do. So these are just some of the assets that faith communities have, which we've been able to sort of tap into through the project. So often faith communities, they're already providing vital services to people and reaching sort of hard to reach members of the community. The shared motivations and values, which we've been able to capitalise on as well. As I said, these sort of existing networks and the peer-to-peer support that exists within such communities. Trust and respect, which is really important when you're trying to deliver advice and encourage behaviour change. Assets. So, I mean, buildings, often, we've needed to use these spaces as places to get people together, to share advice with each other and to run training sessions as well. So that's been really valuable. And of course, this is a European project. So there's overlap between different countries in terms of the kind of structures that exist. Even if faith communities are different in different countries, we've found there to be some similarities, which has really helped the project work. So to go through some of the activities, I mean, I mentioned it briefly already, but to start with, each partner has been engaging with faith communities within their region. And when I say faith communities, I mean all sorts of different faiths. We haven't, Groundwork London and the other organisations in the project are not aligned to a particular faith. This has been about engaging different faiths and thinking about what their values are, what would motivate them to change their behaviour. So we've really looked at the different faiths and seen, what is it in the Quran or what is it in the Bible that would inspire people to change the way they behave? And as we've seen, and many of you will have seen over the past year or so, there's been lots of examples of faith communities engaging in this agenda in terms of in the run-up to COP21, for example, last year, and identifying some of those sort of values that really mean something to them and help inspire change. From those groups, we recruit these energy champions, train and support them to give advice. And then households that have been advised make pledges, and we've developed a pledge card through the programme, and they sort of tick off different pledges, which I'll show you some examples of in a moment. And then we obviously record those pledges and see what that means in terms of the impact on energy use and carbon emissions reductions. And I'll come to the monitoring side in a bit. We've also developed a range of project materials. So we've developed, for example, a faith community engagement manual, which looks at the different faiths in turn. And as I was talking before, just about the sort of values and motivations, it looks at some of that as well. And we've been sharing our experiences, not only with the partners, but also with other projects in Europe and other networks and organisations that might be interested in these kind of projects. Partly to share our learning, but also to hopefully encourage others to maybe think about how to engage faith communities in these kind of issues in the future. So we've worked with the Energy Saving Trust to identify some of the key behaviour changes that can lead to the biggest savings in the home. And they came back to us with this top 10 list of the activities that people could take. And this is what we decided to focus our pledges on. We've, of course, engaged households to talk about, other activities they could take as well. But these are the ones that we've really wanted to focus on because they'll lead to the biggest savings. And as you can see, they won't be new to most of you. They're all pretty simple things, pretty easy things, but yet things that a lot of people don't do already. So these are where we focused our sort of efforts on encouraging households to change the way they behave. So how have we done so far? Well, we're pretty much coming to the end of the project. So these are the figures for the sort of European-wide project in terms of where we've got to. So we had a target, as you saw before, of 295 volunteers, and we've got 400 of them. We wanted to do 28 training sessions, and we've done 50. So you can see we've exceeded in those areas. However, we had a target for 700 demonstration sessions, so that's fine, we've achieved that. But where we found it difficult has been the Energy Champion Advice sessions. Our target is 6,200, and as you can see there, these are figures for the end of September. We were not quite at the target yet. Some of the partners have been working hard through October to finish sort of meeting the targets, and so the number will be a bit higher. But I think what's clear in this is that, and we're going to come on to some of our key challenges and learnings and things like that, but what's clear here is that we've needed more volunteers, more training, more support for volunteers to get to a number of sort of sessions that is actually lower than we wanted to achieve, and that's been quite an important learning for us during the project. It sort of shows that actually it's been more resource intensive than we thought it would be, which has still been, you know, very valuable. And as I said before, there are 7 organisations delivering this, so not our partner in Austria. So I kind of touched on a bit of one of the challenges that we've faced there, and before I hand over to Rebecca to talk more about what we've been doing in London, this is some of the sort of big challenges that have come up in the European partnership that really we couldn't necessarily have seen when we started out. So some of the partners have really found that energy has not actually been a priority issue for the households they've been engaging or for the faith communities they've been engaging. And that's in part because of the refugee crisis. So our partners in Austria, Sweden and Belgium all found that every faith community they tried to engage, or many of the faith communities they tried to engage, said, well, it's all very well and good, but we've got huge numbers of refugees coming in, and us as a church or as another faith centre, it's our duty to look after all these people that don't even have a home. So we can't prioritise energy at the moment. In Sweden, a lot of the homes there are of a good standard already, and so, you know, whilst in the UK we could go to lots of flats that are very inefficient in terms of their energy use, they would be going to households where they said, well, we're okay, you know, our energy use is pretty low. And lots of faith members are already volunteering in other ways, including in supporting the refugees that were coming into their countries. But as a result, they just didn't have time to engage in this kind of work as well. Over the course of the project, we had terror threats in both France and Belgium, where we have partner organisations, and that became very difficult for the partners to organise training sessions or energy advice sessions. So that's been a real issue as well. And we found even in London that there's been some sort of hate crime against certain faiths. For example, one of the mosques that we've been working with in London. And that's, you know, as I said here, it's leading to nervousness about security, less likely to let lots of people come in and give advice or talk to their community. And of course, there's just the reality of working with volunteers, you know, that they are just normal people who have normal lives and are trying to get on with their normal lives. And that's really proved to be quite a challenge for us, making assumptions that they'd be able to just spend all their free time going to sort of talk to their peers and give energy advice. So I will hand over to Rebecca, who's going to talk a bit more about London and some of the activities, challenges and results from there too.
Yeah. So I'll start off just talking about the London results. So our target was to deliver 1,450 advice sessions. 1,400, and we've actually gone over. We've delivered 50 more than we needed. We've held over 120 events. Our target was to recruit 65 volunteers, and we recruited 125. And our target was to have 4 training sessions, and we've had 18. And to do this, we've had to work with 85 approximately organisations. And as Hannah said, this is really the pattern that a lot of the partners have been seeing, that actually in the original plan, the idea was that each of the volunteers would deliver 22 advice sessions each. And it became very, very obvious that that wasn't going to happen, so we needed more volunteers to engage the kind of numbers of people we needed to reach our advice session target. So I'll go through what some of those challenges are. So we've worked with a lot of different organisations across London. A lot of different intermediary organisations is where we really started. So these are a mixture of multi-faith groups, environmental religious groups, councils, volunteering organisations, and they have led us to specific faith groups. We've worked across a number of different faiths. These are sort of broadly grouped together in sort of Islam and Christians on the left and Jewish and others, but we've worked across a number of different faith centres. We haven't necessarily found that any one faith group is easier to work with than others, and we've been kind of pretty opportunistic where we have contacts and people who can introduce us. We've tended to work there, and I'll go into why that is a bit more later. So we set off thinking that this was how the thing would work. We would contact a faith group, they would distribute some information for us to gather interest, We'd then hold some kind of information session for people who are interested in being a volunteer. They'd then sign up and we'd do a training session at a time that suits them. They'd come along to a shadowing session and then they'd start giving advice to their friends, to their family, to their neighbours. So the idea is they're delivering to people they know, so they're not going into strangers' homes. And we predominantly thought at the beginning that they would be predominantly in-home advice sessions. And the premise of this project is the skills then stay in the community for years to come. So once we've left, there are still people who can deliver advice to their friends and family at the time of year when it's most salient, which is obviously winter. This is how it kind of worked in reality. So it took a long time for a faith group to be involved, whether that's either just listening to us in the first place, agreeing to meet with us, or then going through a kind of democratic process to agree that they wanted to engage with us. And it also obviously has to fit in with their own timescales and their own timetables of things they're doing. And if it's a well-organised faith group, they might have planned things out months in advance, in which case there is no time for you to fit in your session. If it is a not very well-organised faith group, there's a reason that it's not very well organised, and there's probably nobody that can help you organise something there. So just even engaging in the first place was a problem. And then you have to obviously make them realise that this is something that they want to do. And a lot of the time, we just didn't get any response. So these are often run by volunteers, the kind of administration side of faith groups, and they're very, very busy, and they don't have time to respond to your letter, your email, your phone call, your visit. So we also then realised that at no point was we had to provide every content for everything that went out. At no point were people going to provide anything for us. We had to make sure that anything that we ran was at a time that made it as easy as possible for any volunteer to take part. So that meant all our staff had to be available at weekends and evenings, going after prayer groups, going on Sundays, going on Saturdays, so that's at a time when people are already at the Faith Centre. And again, any training session had to be held at a similar time. And then, as ever, you find that there are a lot of dropouts. So we found that a lot of people were coming to the training session just because they wanted to know for themselves rather than they wanted to then impart the information to anyone else. And actually, a lot of what we're talking about is quite technical. And a lot of the people that were free to be volunteers, they're free for a reason. So they're free maybe because they're mums, maybe they're unemployed. And so where we thought after a training session and some in-home shadowing, volunteers might feel confident enough to impart this information by themselves, we found that that rarely was the case. And they just need a lot of encouragement and hand-holding along the way. So I'm going to go into those things in a bit more detail. So while faith groups are engaging in climate change as an issue that they might campaign on, they might go to marches on, they might sign a joint letter on, it is very, very different when it comes to doing stuff themselves on the ground. So climate change seems to be being engaged in a sort of a global issue, but not as a practical, what can I do to make a difference to my life issue when it comes to faith groups. However, there is a real interest in people learning how to manage energy in their homes. That is from a fuel poverty aspect. So a lot of the faith groups that we're working with are working with groups in London who are very low income, who might be paying way over the odds for their energy bills, and for them actually learning about energy management could make a real fundamental difference to their day-to-day lives. So the interest was coming from that angle. We found we needed an enormously wide network to be able to engage the number of faith groups that we needed. So we focused our work in two boroughs, in Ealing and in Barnet, and then we also had a kind of general across London, wherever we had contacts focused. And we found in Barnet, for example, we needed to engage over 107 different faith organisations just to get to a handful that we were then working with on a regular basis.
A handful? 107?
We found that personal introductions by a well-connected people really, really work best, because lots of people, as I said before, have lots of other things going on in their lives and really weren't responding when we just did sort of blanket introductions. And the time from introduction to actually getting to a point of training was at least 3 months. So this is working through the democratic processes of a faith group. In some cases, it was up to 6 months from our first meeting with them. So it takes quite a long time. And we found there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So each of the faith centres are different, each faith is different, which means that you might have to have different engagement materials to engage each of them. And then each faith centre within those faiths are different. So, for example, we had some faiths we were working with that were very conservative, and we weren't able to bring along male advisors to talk to women and things like that. We needed to wear headscarves, where in other faiths, other faith groups from Islam, it was absolutely fine for that to happen. So it really, really depended on the particular faith centre itself. This is just to show you a variety of the engagement things we've done. This is taking part at the Christian Research Annual Conference in Excel. And just on the complete opposite, this is going along to an outside church in Ealing to talk about our programme. So our advisors really were getting all the way across London in completely different circumstances. She got very sunburnt at this event, so but did manage to engage some people there, so that was great. And this is just to show an example of one of our engagement materials, which again, you can see here has had to be translated, and we needed to provide very specific engagement material for each faith centre. Going on to volunteers, so we need to be totally flexible to what the needs and timings of the faith communities I talked about earlier in terms of timing and when we run events. We might need to translate materials, and that's not just in written materials. Often we needed to have translators to come along to the sessions. Mostly we could get those translators from within the faith group themselves. They would provide somebody who could be the translator, but that wasn't always option. And we needed to have things that were very, very picture and very, very picture heavy and simple. So when we were doing the training, so that it was very, very accessible to people with lots of different levels of education. We needed to account for prayer timetables. So we did run one training session where halfway through the training session, everybody went off to pray, which took sort of about an hour out of the training session in the end. So we learned to be a bit more wise about that. We realised that it was far better to piggyback on existing events than to try and run our own. So we stopped after a while running information sessions on the programme and just going along to existing events and having a little slot at the end to talk about it. If this was sort of the holy grail of getting the imam or the pastor or whoever it was to talk and link their faith to energy saving in their sermon or khutbah or whatever was the relevant speech, which then would make what we were doing linked to the faith. But it was very, very hard to actually get. We got it quite a few times, but it was always quite a challenge. And I talked about tailoring. And then this last thing is we found ourselves once being treated like salesmen, and then we suddenly realised that afterwards the particular location that we'd been given in that mosque was where they would give the stalls that sell things to people. So we found that we were then being bracketed by all the people going past as somebody who was trying to voice something on them that they didn't actually want and to try and get money from them, which we were obviously not doing at all. So we learned that we had to sort of work out what are they normally expecting when they see a stall, and was it something that they wanted or not. And we learned very early on as well that we had to remove the idea of commitment from the volunteers at the beginning. So we started off by trying to get a commitment from volunteers that they would deliver 10 advice sessions in return for the training that they got. Very quickly we realised that just put everybody off. So we had to take away the requirement to give 10 advice sessions, and we basically said whatever you can do is fine, even if that's nobody, even if you don't go on to train anybody. And by doing that, it made it far more acceptable and people were far more likely to sign up. So the training sessions, I've talked already about the flexibility and the time and date. Then in running the session, we found going to different faith groups, you might have people that everyone turns up on time. You might have a session where people turn up halfway through the session, people leave halfway through the session. We found with a lot of the people we were training, particularly mums with children, they had a set amount of free time each day. And in that free time, they needed to go to the bank, go to the post office, etc., as well as come to our training if that's what was happening that day. So we had to devolve a training that could account for people going in and out throughout it. And multiple sessions might be needed because for the same reason that people have busy lives, they can't always come to the session that you set up. We found that people like getting little bits of stuff. So the gadgets that we can hand out, whether it's shower timers, energy monitors, all that kind of thing, really attracted people to come along to the training. And we found it had to be super interactive to keep the volunteers engaged. As I said, we had people of all different educational levels and people who were used to learning, not used to learning, and so we had to make sure that it could involve all of them. This is just an example of one of the training sessions we ran in Finchley, up in the Reform Synagogue there. Just some of the training materials, and I hope we're now going to play a little video of the training session. This is actually one from in Brussels, so it'll give you an understanding, hopefully.
vi horaires, on en a deux. Ici, il y a
That's the end.
Stop it there. Right. Go back to PowerPoint. I hope that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of the different kind of activities people are doing, both in a kind of practical way and also a slightly more sort of theoretical way. And these are some of the training sessions that we had. Each of the different countries had very different audiences, and as you can see, a majority of our training sessions probably look very different to the session that was in that video there, which was in Brussels. And we asked them, one of the things we asked them to think about at the training session was how this interacted with their faith. So these are just some of the comments that we had back from the trainees. Whilst these were links that they made, we found that it really wasn't actually the driving reason why people were there. So these were links that we were able to explore, but it wasn't the sort of motivator behind it. And the motivation was really much more on the fuel poverty side, as I said previously, how people were coming along because they wanted to learn how could they make their own lives easier, and how could they make the lives of their family and friends easier, rather than from a sort of climate perspective and linking climate to religion. On to sort of the ongoing support. So we found that even some of the basic organisational tasks of delivering this programme was beyond some of our volunteers. So we had a number of volunteers who had never had a job in their life, who just even filling in the forms was challenging. Some people who couldn't really write very well. So what we had thought that might be quite simple tasks, filling in a basic form, actually for them was very challenging. Then just even the logistical aspects of arranging an advice session, so arranging and booking in a series of advice sessions in advance, again, was logistically challenging. We asked them, okay, what about we'll organise a joint advice session together, and it will be a group advice session, you bring the people, and we'll come along and handhold you to actually deliver the advice. Even that was challenging. So I think at the start we slightly over-anticipated the capability of some of the volunteers to carry out what we were expecting of them. We found that it was far easier to manage groups of volunteers as a whole in area kind of locations than it was necessarily working with individual volunteers. And that was partly also because volunteers wanted a social aspect out of this. They didn't really want to be by themselves always delivering advice sessions on their own. And we had a dedicated volunteer coordinator to help with that role, as well as the Green Doctors, the specialist advice people. As I said before, you really needed to be totally flexible in what we expected of the energy champions to deliver. They have busy lives, they have other things going on. If they could organise one advice session where they invited 5 of their friends and we were able to support them in delivering that advice session, that was fantastic. And we were very, very happy if a volunteer was able to do that. If they were able to do one in-home advice session where they advised their neighbour, we were very, very happy that they were able to do that. on the whole, they all preferred to be involved in group advice sessions. We also found that there was a lot of stigma sometimes about going into other people's homes. So that was either that the volunteers themselves didn't want to go into other people's private spaces, or their religion made it hard for them to be able to do that freely. Or it was the people that were getting advice. These are people who are used to interacting in a faith centre. They're not used to necessarily interacting in their private homes. So for the people that they wanted to give the advice to, they didn't necessarily want to invite people back into their homes. They might be ashamed of their home for whatever reason. And so they were much more comfortable having group advice sessions where things were being discussed in a more neutral place. That obviously had implications for the kind of advice that could be given. When you're not there looking at someone's particular thermostat or particular boiler or particular setup in a room, it's much more theoretical, the advice, than when you're in situ. The other thing that we found was that we have a very established Green Doctor programme working across London where Green Doctors are going into people's homes. Green Doctors are neutral people. When you start talking about things like energy, you start talking about energy bills, you come into discussions about debt, a number of issues that are very private. Now, it's one thing to talk to a neutral Green Doctor about that, who you might never see in your life again, and who might be able to give you some advice that helps you. It's a completely different thing to talk to your friend, neighbour, faith group leader, who you then might see the next day, and then you know they have that bit of personal information about you, and you don't know who they might share it with, even if they say that they'll keep it private. So we found that actually a number of discussions were deemed too sort of personal. This is just to indicate some of the social aspects of volunteering. So this is a volunteer on the left, Hafaya, who's delivering advice at an event. This was the kind of popular thing that volunteer champions like to do. And this is some of our champions. We had a picnic. We tried to do things that brought some of the champions together, so they did get some of the social aspects, as well as doing sort of individual sessions. And these are some of the venues that we ran advice sessions at. So it might be libraries, school halls, faith centres, anywhere that would basically sort of host a session. What was amazing is by working with some of these communities, we were able to get into venues that we would never be able to get into normally, and to get to groups that we never might be able to access. And I'll talk more about that in some of the case studies. But on the whole, we found that we were, particularly one group we were really pleased to access is sort of immigrant communities who are nervous about authority. We found that lots of these people had very poor understanding of the energy system in their own home, and they had a bit nervousness in engaging with authority, and that extended to energy suppliers. So it meant that they were often on the highest energy tariff because they never rang up to try and change their tariff. So we added on to what the core Spirit programme, which was just about sort of pledging and learning about energy saving, we added on a load of stuff which was about how do you understand your energy bill, how do you read your energy bill, how do you switch provider, how do you register for all the priority services that there are out there for people who are in this situation, how do you get referrals to all the other advice that is in your borough. So we were able to add on information and advice that was much more relevant to these communities than just the things that they could do themselves and that they weren't accessing in any other way. This is just more on what I talked about earlier. We thought we'd start off by accessing people's kind of intrinsic motivation and the links between faith and climate change. But really we found that they were more motivated by what they can do themselves and what they can get themselves. And then beyond that, how can they help their communities do the same thing once they've done it themselves? We introduced a competition when we were trying to get faith communities to engage more in the programme, which was that whoever gave most advice sessions, that faith community would win £500. This was obviously completely going sort of extrinsic motivation. We actually found it didn't motivate anyone. So it was a potentially good idea, but it failed. This is what attracted people to the trainings. You can see here a group of people proudly holding all their goodies that they've got from the training session. It was the more goodies and stuff we gave out, the more people came along. So,
yeah, so I know we want to leave some time for questions as well, but there's a few, we thought we'd share a few case studies and then just talk a bit about some of the evaluation that we've been doing. But so Rebecca's going to give a few case studies from our London work, but just to highlight some of the things that I guess have worked really well as well, because it's easy, it's easy for us to say about some of the challenges, but actually, there've been some real positives as well. So you've seen a video of this sort of part of the project in action. But this is 21 Solutions, our partner in Brussels, who have really focused on the interactive side of the training in terms of the materials and also the approaches they've taken. So a big part of the training has been about getting the group that are being trained to go into a house and learn together. This house is actually owned by one of the guys involved in the project, and it was really interesting hearing him talk about it because, as Rebecca's been saying, people are not that confident sort of allowing people into their home or going into other people's homes. And he, the guy from the project, was very nervous about letting people into his homes. He said he spent 3 hours cleaning the flat before anyone came round because he didn't want to present it to people. So you can see, like, it's real. But yeah, so there was some really good positives around sort of improving people's confidence, their sort of capacity to deliver advice amongst the group that were being trained. And interestingly, the approach that 21 Solutions took was that they did training that was sort of multi-faith, whereas a lot of our training was in a faith centre, so it would all be people from that one faith centre. And they found that this sort of led to greater cohesion between the group being trained, which was quite nice as well. And as I said there, in terms of diversity of participants. But it did take more time. It took more resource from the people involved at 21 Solutions, and the training took longer because there was the sort of the theoretical part and the practical part inside the home as well. And perhaps off-putting for some people who prefer a sort of more, very PowerPoint-focused sort of traditional formal approach to training. But overall, I think it's worked very well for them. In France, our French partner, they wanted to kind of keep things light-hearted with their training. So they've, and also with the delivery of energy advice. So they've got a game that they use, and it's to help people kind of understand better about their energy use. And they give each of their volunteers an energy briefcase that contains all these materials to help them sort of demonstrate visually some of the things that they're talking about, like energy-saving light bulbs. I think this has been particularly useful where they've delivered some advice outside of the home, for example, at a faith centre, so where you can't actually show people things in the home itself, they've got this sort of tools to hand. It's been really good at encouraging people to talk to each other about these issues, and it's sort of encouraging a level of debate. And groups have been quite animated, but it is time consuming, of course, as well to develop such materials. And the partner found that despite this, their energy champions really still wanted that support from Prioritaire in terms of actually giving the advice. And making things light-hearted, some of the energy champions were worried it was a bit patronising. So there's sort of ups and downs to it, but overall they've used this in other projects as well and have found it to be quite beneficial. In Sweden, this is just an example of how the Swedish partner has taken the opportunity to link to existing actions, environmental actions within the church. So the Church of Sweden, there's been something called a bidding stick. It's possibly not a particularly good translation from the Swedish, but basically it sort of travels around different parishes with climate commitments in it, and each one adds their own commitment to it. And our partner, SEA, has been able to get involved with that and go and present when these bidding sticks are being sent around the parishes and give advice and engage people to become volunteer energy champions as well. So it's less about doing something completely new and different for that faith centre, but about saying, we know you're interested already, here's how we can help you engage people around what they can do in their homes as well as in the church itself. But a bit like what we've been saying in terms of the findings overall, it's all very well, you can get people to think about these issues, but actually they still find it difficult to get people to then actually go on to making commitments and actually doing stuff in their home. But again, overall, this has been quite a positive sort of outcome for the Swedish partner, despite the difficulties they've had overall, like I was saying, in terms of the sort of refugee crisis earlier. Lots of other examples from Europe, but in the interest of time, I think I'll hand over to Rebecca to do a few of the UK ones.
Just give you a few examples of the specific faith groups we work with. This was one of the first faith groups that we were able to engage with actively, and that is because we at Groundwork London already had a relationship with this church where we'd done a garden for them in the past. This was a really interesting example because although we had lots of interest from the congregation, actually there was only quite a few people that came along to the training session, and there was sort of 3 people who ended up being active as a result of the programme. But what it did enable us to access was lots of different parts of the community. So the volunteers that we had were able to introduce us to a local disability group, and we were able to go and run a group advice session there, to a food bank, to a young mothers group, to a sheltered housing section, and to a street family centre. So this was really interesting access that some of these volunteers gave. So they weren't necessarily groups that were associated with the church, but personal connections that those volunteers had. And even though we had this sort of big connection with St John's Church, it showed us how hard it was going to be to work with some of the other faith centres. But as a result of this, I think 39 people were given advice sessions as a result of the St John's Church engagement. The second one is the Muslim Cultural Heritage Centre. This was an example of us really using intermediaries to access the faith centre. So we worked with MAID and also with the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. They had actually already been engaged with environment, and they had done some focus groups among the church there about what were the big issues, among the mosque, about what were the big issues for the people. And out of that focus group came energy bills as the #1 big issue. So people were really, really struggling with paying their energy bills. It's a massive mosque here. There's 7,000 people who attend. This is the place where we went along and did a stall, and people thought we were trying to sell something. So we found we were it was very, very busy and loads of people going past, but we were really failing to engage anybody. But we ran a couple of sessions here. It was a sort of relaxed but quite lengthy process. So again, it was 4 months from first contact to be able to run those sessions. And we also found from working with them that the word spirit wasn't a very good word to be using in Islam. So we then had to take off the word spirit from all our leaflets that we were using there, and then from then on we didn't use it when we were engaging with Muslim groups. We had a real issue with lots of people who don't speak English here, so we had to have translators for sessions. And we had a lot of people here who came along for training who really had no interest in sharing with other people, but it was fantastic that we were able to make a difference to them and in their own homes. And again here, the administrative side of it was very, very heavy, and volunteers really struggled with it, and we really, really needed to support them to be able to run any kind of sessions. And then this is just a sort of quote here from the head of the ladies group. And then the last group is the Finchley Reform Synagogue up in Barnet. This was an interesting group because it took us quite a long time to engage with them. We had a session, we managed to get hold of a woman who'd run a sort of climate session back in November and was interested in environment. And after a while, we were able to set up a training session. 6 people came along to that. 3 of them became active volunteers, and actually were active in a number of different ways. So coming along to advice sessions, coming along to information sessions, and actually doing individual advice sessions themselves. And most recently, they invited us back to speak to the elderly social and cultural group, and we were able to do a sort of joint advice session there. And this is one of the places where we have an energy champion who is confident enough that says that she will be able to continue holding sessions once the programme's over. So she's been involved quite a lot throughout. She's come along to a lot of different things, and now is in a place where she feels she can continue it. So 33 people, we think, through this synagogue so far have been engaged. And we hope that will continue. And that's just a quote from her. And then just a couple of examples of volunteers. This is a volunteer, Hanny, who was trained back in October 2015. And at the beginning, she delivered 4 home advice sessions and she came along to events. And then she got a job. And this is an example of sort of real life interfering. Then she lost her job and got back in touch. And then she set up a group advice session at her school. At that school, we were able to advise a load of people and set up a load of referrals to do home visits. And now she's working full-time again, so she feels she's sort of done her bit. But she's actually interested in pursuing energy advice as a career. So she's somebody who's been really sort of switched on by this programme. And this is another volunteer, Jim, from up in Barnet. He was somebody who really suffered from not very much confidence. And so he came along to 2 training sessions. And he liked coming and doing the community events, but he wasn't confident to do any of the home visits himself. He is unemployed, but he doesn't, again, feel he has the confidence to sort of pursue a career in this area. The advice was really valuable to him personally. So he himself had not a very energy efficient home setup, and he had a boiler that wasn't working, etc., etc. But here again is an example of he was somebody who was ashamed for one of us to come and visit him in his home to help him. So he wasn't able to have a shadow visit in his home, which just shows the kind of feelings that get in the way of some of this advice.
So just the last few slides to talk about the monitoring evaluation around the project. So obviously we're really interested in the results anyway, but the programme, as we said, is funded by Europe, and they are particularly interested in the results as well, because it's really important for them to be able to demonstrate the impact of the money that's been invested in such projects. So we are obviously monitoring our interactions with faith centres. We're monitoring the volunteers that are engaged and what they go on to do, and we're sort of getting anecdotal evidence from them, as well as sort of just the numbers of volunteers that we've got. Obviously the number of advice sessions delivered, the pledges, and then the sort of the impact in terms of the environment as well. So the way that we are doing that is where it's possible to do so, we've got country-specific data. So in the UK, we've been working with the Energy Saving Trust, who have been able to provide us with data for those key measures that I listed earlier in the pledges, the key sort of behaviour changes. Some of the partners are using European data, and other partners have their own country-specific data. But that in itself obviously has been quite a challenge, because historically there isn't a lot of data associated with behaviour change, and the data that is there, often you have to caveat it and things like that. So it's really positive for us to be able to work with Energy Saving Trust on this. And obviously, as I said earlier, we've been really focusing on the measures with the behaviour changes with the biggest potential, and those that we've got the data for, so that we can measure our impact. For the Energy Saving Trust data, it's been really important for us to collect information on the property type, the energy type in the home, and obviously whether the pledges have been carried out or not. So we have a record of all the pledges that have been made, but we are also following up with 10% of households to understand sort of 3 to 6 months after they've received advice whether or not they've actually gone ahead and kept the pledges that they've made. So we're evaluating the results at the moment. As I said, it's the last month of the programme, so we'll be sharing those results when we've finished doing so. But in terms of our London pledges, you can see here that the savings associated with the commitments that have been made. As I said on here, it's lower than expected. So our initial targets that I put at the front were based on an assumption that households would save, on average, 3 megawatt hours per year in terms of energy savings, and 0.5 tonnes of CO2. These are lower than that. And I think, as I said there, it's probably a conservative estimate. There's been quite a few reasons why that might be lower. Some of the biggest savings are around turning your thermostat down, and the data we've got from Energy Saving Trust works in 1 degree, so turn it down from 21 to 20 degrees or 20 to 19. We've had households that have said, we want to turn our thermostat down by 5 degrees, and we're like, well, of course, that's great, do it. But we don't have the data for measuring that, so that's been difficult for us to record that. If a home is not, if their energy type is not gas or electric, we haven't got data for that, unfortunately, and we've got data for terraced houses, flats and semi-detached houses, but not beyond that. So obviously that does cover a lot of the properties, most of the properties that we've been working with, but there are a few gaps which mean we know we're not quite able to capture everything. We've also, there are households that have made pledges to do other things that we don't have data for, or they've received measures from us like radiator panels or tap aerators or efficient shower heads and things like that that we haven't been able to capture all of the data for. So we do think the impact's likely to be greater than we've got there. There's also been a real emphasis, and we had advice from sort of behaviour change experts on this, there's been a real emphasis on encouraging households to focus on maybe 2 or 3 pledges. So sometimes the energy advisors have gone into homes and a household has said, well, I want to pledge to do every single one of those things. And they've encouraged them to think, what can you actually realistically do? You know, is it better to do 2 or 3 things really well, or sort of pledge to do 10 things and not quite manage them all? So we've been focusing on encouraging them to do the biggest impact where they can, but also focus on 2 or 3 rather than everything. I think as well, it's been really important to recognise that, you know, doing these behaviour changes has to fit in with the lifestyle of the households as well. And we've done quite a lot of the energy advice side of the project in summer months. And of course, people aren't thinking about heating then, and that's a learning for us. You know, the biggest benefit, say if we weren't finishing the project now, this would be a really, really good time to be giving that kind of advice. So yeah, I think that's an important learning for us, is that you've got to, you know, time the engagement well according to when things are more salient for households. And what else we found is that actually we've gone to quite a lot of households with these pledges, and they've turned around and said, well, we're doing all that already, which is of course great, but we're not going to then record it because it would, you know, it's not an impact of the project, but it's fantastic that lots of people have actually said to us, these kind of behaviour changes are things we do. And that's just to show you how we're collecting data. We've got a big Excel with lots of records of all the pledges, and then we're sort of calculating the impact. And these will, when we finished analysing the data, we'll be sharing it all publicly on our website as well. So please do take a look in due course. Some of the sort of an overview of some of the things we've learned, just to wrap up. As we've said already, you know, these issues, climate change is a concern, but in general it's not been translating to local action. Through the project we have seen that there are faith communities where it has been translating to local action, which is great, and hopefully we'll see that continue and become more so. It has been challenging and time consuming, and we have required a bespoke approach for each community we've worked with, but you know, the numbers still stand up. Like we've engaged 1,580 people in total just in London, and each partner around Europe has done that. So, you know, we still have achieved quite a lot, but we know that it's been more sort of resource intensive than we originally anticipated. People are more motivated by the benefits that they'll see in their communities than the environmental benefits. But, you know, that's okay. That's about then tailoring how the communications work with them, and, you know, how you then sell this kind of project to them. And that's basically what I've already said. So the messages, you know, framing the messages in the right way is really key. And we found that group discussions, the sort of social side of things, has been really important. Making commitments publicly, so we've got the pledge cards, people leave them in their homes, they leave them somewhere obvious, helps them, but also shows, you know, when people come round, this is what they're doing. And so that's been really positive too. As I mentioned at the top, we have developed various resources, and if you're interested, take a look at the website. That's just some of them there, the pledge cards on the right, Faith Community Engagement Manual that I mentioned before as well. And the training resources that we've been using, we're sort of sharing as well for others who might be interested. We've got energy advice on the website, which it's come from the work that our green doctors have been doing for a long time, but that's available on the website. And I should say that these resources are available in all the partner languages, so the sort of European focus of the project means that those working in all different communities in different countries in Europe are able to access these materials as well. So yeah, in terms of the next steps, the project's shortly coming to an end. If any of you are interested or know of communities that might be interested in doing this kind of thing anywhere in London or even outside of London, then let us know, because we're really keen to support people where we can. Interfaith Week is coming up in just under 2 weeks' time, so we're going to be doing an event there, sort of a workshop for those who are interested in thinking about the practical side of things for doing these kind of initiatives elsewhere. And obviously, once the project's finished, our website will continue to be available with all the resources that we've been developing. And for us, I think in London, it's really important for us to think about the sort of networks that we've established and how we can continue to build on them and also use them and not just sort of let it all go to one side. So that's something we're really thinking about at the moment is, what are the opportunities to continue engaging faith communities, whether that's on energy efficiency or water or other kind of issues that Groundwork works in. And we're thinking about that as part of the legacy of the project at the moment. But that's it from us. But thank you very much for your time. That's great. Thank you.